Good evening, good afternoon. Welcome back to High Top Sports Oregon. Today we have a defensive video for you. This is kind of the second part. Last time we did the offensive video, and we're going to break down the defense and what it's going to look like in the Big Ten and how it's gonna play out. Let's go ahead and bring in our star of the show, Derek the Duck. How you doing, big dog?
Hey, good man. I can never complain. How we doing this week?
Oh, another day in paradise, man. Got a fresh new shirt or hoodie for us. We haven't seen that one yet before. So reaching
I
into the wardrobe, got that classic Oregon logo on today.
Oh yeah, I know the audience. They like to comment on the apparel, but I thought I'd break out a new one for everybody tonight. So I'm feeling fresh today.
Gotcha. So let's go ahead and get into it. Obviously, going into the Big Ten, we kind of had this conversation last week with the offense. Let's go ahead and get into the defense. And what are we looking forward to? Where do they need to improve? What are they bringing in? And how do you think they're going to stack up to the Big Ten? Big Ten's known for, bigger linebackers, bigger defensive line to combat those big offensive line. Not necessarily speed everywhere, but just kind of lunch pail, hardworking guys. And you do have some stars. The Watt brothers from Wisconsin. They came out of UW. Michigan has pumped out plenty of talent there on the defensive side of the ball. So has Ohio State. AJ Hawk, a great linebacker for them, and on and on. So how do you think Oregon, going from the Big 12, maps up against some of these other competitors in the Big 10?
Yeah, so obviously coming out the pack, the pack is just your team is structured a little bit differently. And last year, Oregon had one of its better defenses that they've had in the last 10 years realistically. They finished as a top 22 scoring defense and total defense last year, which was phenomenal. Heading into the Big Ten, yeah, as you kind of prefaced, it's just a different caliber of defense that we're used to seeing. And just kind of looking at the defenses last year, I'm looking at Michigan, Penn State, Ohio State, Iowa, UCLA, Nebraska, and Rutgers all had top 20 defenses total last year in the Big Ten. So that just kind of tells you the caliber we're dealing with. But heading into the Big Ten for the first year, it's kind of exciting, obviously. But I do think that what Oregon was able to do in the previous recruiting classes, kind of how their roster is structured currently and what they were able to bring in through the portal, I think they are set up for success in the Big Ten. As we've kind of seen over the last 2 years, we've heard the national narrative a little bit, how Dan Lanning's trying to bring that like SEC style to the pack, now the Big Ten. And I think he's done a fairly good job doing that in terms of, the trench work in both the offensive and defensive lines over the last couple of years. With what they've done in the portal and the secondary and who they're returning in the linebacker room this year, I think they are set up for success. But like you said, it's just a different game in the Big Ten. So, there's a lot to be seen yet. Myself as a fan, I am quite curious to see how this plays out. But if we're just looking at it on paper, and obviously we'll dig into it a little bit here in a few minutes, but I think we're going to be okay. I know a lot of people are skeptical just because of the Oregon, you think speed, you think, that big flashy brand. But I do think what's been happening over the last 2 years in particular is there's been like a smooth transition happening into what you are typically seeing of a Big Ten defense. So I think this is the first year that this is going to come to fruition a little bit. But yeah, obviously we'll dig into that here in a minute.
Yeah, for sure. And so let's go ahead and let's start with obviously the DB room. Let's go ahead, check that out, and see what you're bringing there comparative to what some of these other guys have. Now, obviously, cornerbacks minus Ohio State. You don't have a bunch of them coming out of the Big Ten. But they had Witherspoon last year out of Illinois. They get one or two to really pop every couple of years that are really top caliber linebackers. Witherspoon last year. Sometimes you'll get an Ohio State guy. Iowa has a guy this year. So it's kind of one of those things where not elite in the DB room, different type of DBs, obviously. But what's Oregon going to do, and how are they going to stack up against the Big Ten DBs? What are they bringing in?
Yeah, so in my opinion, I think the DB room is probably the room on the defensive side of the ball in where they stack up the best. I do think Ohio State, they're kind of that clear cut number one in terms of what they bring in terms of the DB room. They were fortunate enough to bring back a lot of their talent that could have foregone their senior season, went to the NFL this year, obviously opted to come back. And that was big for the Buckeyes. So I do think they kind of have that clear cut number one DB room in the Big Ten this year. But after that, there's kind of a lot of ambiguity going on. There's obviously a lot of the good passing defenses last year. They lost some pieces. Teams like Michigan, they're returning a couple. They lost some, lost a transfer to Alabama, and, we expect them to retool. But once again, you don't really know until they hit the field. But what Oregon was able to do is obviously they brought in guys like Jabbar Muhammad, so all Pac-12 second team this year, obviously led the Husky defense to a national championship berth. Cam Alexander from UTSA. PFF graded a top 10 this year in terms of cornerback. He was all conference in the AAC. So that's great. It brought in Brandon Johnson from Duke, who is it's kind of an undervalued name, but one stat that I like to bring up a lot is from a DB perspective, he would have led Oregon's entire defense in TFLs last year. So that kind of tells you he's got a nose for the ball. And that's just in addition to what they already have. So, Jaleel Florence, who was a starting cornerback for this top 25 Ducks defense last year, he returns. We saw a ton of Dante Manning last year with some injuries. Two guys like Kyrie Jackson and Jaleel Florence, who missed a little bit of time. He stepped in and played just fine. So he's returning. And then you got guys like Nico Reed, Roderick Pleasant, Dalen Austin, who are coming back for their second years in this defense. So there's a lot to look forward to in terms of the CB room. And then one I didn't even mention is the number one JUCO cornerback, Sione Lalea, coming out of the College of San Mateo. Dude's another, he's a stud. So I'm kind of excited to see him come in there. There's a ton of depth that's going to be taking place in this cornerback room. So this is kind of the one that, in my opinion, I think they stack up the best comparatively speaking to the rest of the Big Ten. So this is probably the one position group where I think we're set. We're going to be okay. But I really look forward to the depth that we're going to be able to see from this Oregon secondary, in particular in the cornerback room.
Yeah, for sure. And I'm gonna tell you, if there's a spot that I think that they were gonna do well, I would have to say it's the DB room versus some of the wide receivers. Obviously, we know Ohio State's got some absolute dogs in that wide receiver room, but minus that, you're not gonna face another wide receiver room. The DBs aren't going to face anything like, there might be one guy on the team, but Ohio State has four guys on the team that can burn you. So I think that the speed and length that they are bringing in with what they have in the DB room, I think it's going to transition very good into the Big Ten. I think it's probably going to be one of the better DB rooms in the Big Ten, truthfully.
Yeah, currently how I have it projected, I see it being a top 3 room. Like I said, there's some ambiguity going on with some other teams. So, teams like Iowa, they didn't really lose a whole lot of their secondary. Obviously, Cooper DeJean, he was their cornerback one, but Iowa, we always know what they're bringing to the table. Wisconsin's going to have an improved secondary. Michigan brings back, obviously, some very key pieces to their secondary. Penn State, they lost a little bit, but they had a ton of depth last year. So I think there's some teams who, will have some very competitive secondaries, but I also expect Oregon to be in that conversation at the end of the year.
For sure. And like I said, obviously, you say teams like Iowa and Wisconsin should be pretty high powered this year under Luke Fickell year 2, that air raid essence offense. But when you're going against Iowa, Northwestern, you're not too scared in the wide receiver core that you're going up against.
Yeah, unfortunately, we miss Iowa this year. That's kind of a game I would have been looking forward to seeing. But it's like you kind of like we get the Purdue's this year, we get the Illinois this year, get Maryland this year, who they lose the Big Ten's all-time passing yards leader, so that's going to have an effect on their wide receiver room. Washington lost obviously 3 NFL caliber wide receivers, so it's like the wide receiver competition outside of Ohio State we're seeing this year should, take a little bit of a regression in compared to 2023.
Yeah, let's go ahead and let's break down this linebacker room. Obviously, some guys that in a spot where is going to be a little bit different, right? For what they're usually going against the 12. I think you need a little bit thicker linebackers and build. You still got to have speed, but I think you need a especially that middle linebacker's got to be got to be thick. Gotta have some weight to them because a lot of these teams like to ground and pound with the run game. You're not going to be covering a whole lot of tight ends minus Iowa. They always seem to have great tight ends for some reason. Not that the offense does much besides that, but what's the big transition when you look at defensively linebackers versus the Pac-12? Obviously, in the Pac-12, they like them a little thinner, a little faster compared to the Big Ten.
Yeah, I think you touched it right on the head. I think it's kind of you preference that kind of speedy, lean linebacker in the pack. They're able to maneuver in space a little bit easier, and then you get to the Big Ten, and obviously it turns into more of a game at the line of scrimmage. So you're kind of looking for those bulkier type backers. But what Oregon's able to bring back this year is, first off, it's a former Iowa linebacker in Justin Jacobs. He kind of fulfills that role. He is the definition of like that thick linebacker you're looking for. Is able to crash down at the line of scrimmage. So he's kind of like that prototypical Big Ten linebacker that we need. So he's returning. And then Oregon, another major piece returning, in my opinion, is Jeffrey Baza. He's been a staple of this Ducks defense over the last couple of years. He is a little bit more lean, but with that being said, last year and specifically, he put on about 18 pounds of weight. And I think to what it sounds like to me so far is that trend's kind of continuing in that direction. So I think we'll see him put on even a little more size before his final season with the Ducks this year. So those two linebacking positions, I think I'm very confident in what they bring to the table there. It's just kind of that third backer role, which there's a little bit of a question mark. And Oregon's got a ton of young pieces between Tatum Teote, Blake Purchase, Devin Jackson, and those are all guys who they're a little bit thicker, heavier build guys as well. Blake Purchase, a little more of a speed linebacker, gets after the quarterback very well. That's kind of his forte. But I'm pretty confident one of those guys is going to be able to step up and fulfill that role. There's a ton of depth there. It's just a matter of who's going to be the guy. In 2023, we saw a ton of rotation in that linebacker room, and I don't think that's going to change heading into 24. Mm-hmm. Yeah, as you kind of mentioned, heading into the Big Ten, I think a point of emphasis has been, trying to bulk that linebacking room up a little bit in preparation for the different play style in the Big Ten. So I think they've done a good job of doing that so far. It's just a matter of who's going to be able to fulfill that final role, and are they going to be able to be a staple, or is it going to be more of a rotational aspect to that defense? So,
and play calling wise, I would assume that it's going to change a little bit. Instead of playing more quarters, which I don't, guys, I don't know what they played. I'm assuming you're going to play more quarters in the Pac-12 because they're going to try to spread you out with wide receivers. I could see a lot more of this hybrid, like what the Minnesota Vikings do with a big nickel. You slide in one of your bigger hybrid DB / linebackers that can cover a tight end, but can come down and thump if they need to. And then obviously safeties, which is part of the DB room. You're going to have a run stopper hitter in the box. Do you have a guy like that is, a prototypical kind of run stuffer, kind of a guy that can come down in the box and wreak havoc in the safety room?
In the safety room, that's I think Kobe Savage is going to play that a little bit. Ty Sheehan Johnson, I see him playing the deep. Kobe Savage is a little more of he's a smaller dude compared to Ty Sheehan, but he's also a guy who's kind of got a nose for the football. He loves to initiate the contact, and we've seen that. But the one who I actually think is going to step into this role primarily is actually a guy we just talked about in the DB room, and that Brandon Johnson in the nickel. I think that's going to be his primary role in this defense, especially heading into the Big Ten this year. He loves playing at the line of scrimmage. As I mentioned, he's a TFL monster coming out of the secondary, and I think we're going to kind of see him more in that hybrid role as comparison to a true nickel.
Yeah.
So I think that's kind of going to be his role this year. And if he's able to play to any caliber in which he did last year and the year previous, I think, we got a good one in this Ducks defense. I'm kind of excited to see how the schematics change on that a little bit, but that's kind of where I see this going at this point.
Yeah, I could see a lot more big nickel coming out of them, especially with Savage. Um, a guy that can come down and thump somebody, which is what you want. And then a lot of these teams are, they're playing a creeper type defense where you creep everybody up to the line. The NFL is known for it. Florida's done it. It's kind of a Ron Roberts staple. But a lot of teams are adopting this. Dallas does it a lot, where you creep everybody up to the line and then they all bail back. So I think stuff like that. I think that the defense is gonna have to change a little bit, and not change in full schematically, but just your play calling, right? So like usually in the Pac-12, you're not going to call big nickel plays all the time. I think you're just going to have to lean on that, and I think you're going to see guys that maybe didn't get a whole lot of playing time will get a little bit more playing time than you thought, and guys that got a lot of playing time, some of the thinner guys, you're not going to hang two guys in safety that are faster cover guys. You're going to have a hitter down in the box. So it's going to change. It's going to change a little bit for sure, because the game is changing for you.
Oh, 100%. And I think, eventually, maybe not necessarily just this year, but I think, when we saw Oregon sign and bring in Aaron Flowers, I think that's kind of the new standard of what we're going to see in terms of that safety position, where he is a little bit of a bigger guy. He's a guy who loves to initiate contact. I would consider him more of a hybrid role. He can play that coverage role, but at the same time, he's very effective in the run game at the line of scrimmage too. And I think we're going to see more of that in terms of what Oregon's recruiting, just to kind of retool that position a little bit. So yeah, I think like you said, it's just there's gonna be some slight changes that take place, but I think one of the things that are absolutely going to benefit it is Dan Lanning's notorious for bringing in these guys who have a little bit of some fluidity in what they're able to do, a little bit of flexibility there, and I think that's going to pay dividends out in the Big Ten. So pretty excited to see what he's able to do with those guys.
Yeah, you're gonna have to stop the run, and that's something that's gonna come, and where that also goes to is the trenches, the defensive line, obviously, and you got some guys, you got some bigger guys, a transfer from Houston that's a big guy, and then when you think of a Pac-12 defensive line, you're thinking speed rushers. Even the inner guys are not really big; they're more of a speed rusher. But I think that they brought some guys in to bring the beef in, because you're gonna have to have that because of the competition that you're playing.
Yeah, and I think the three guys you pulled up on the screen there, Jordan Birch, Jamari Caldwell, and Mateo. I think all three of these guys kind of fit that Big Ten mold a little bit better than what people assume when you think of a Pac-12 defense.
Yeah.
Jamari Caldwell, obviously, as we can see, he's a bigger body guy, a true run stopper. He was an all-conference guy in the AAC last year. He was considered a heavy Texas favorite before he eventually announced he was coming to Eugene this year. So that was a major piece. Arguably one of the biggest returners in all of this Oregon Ducks team was Jordan Birch saying, hey, I'm going to come back for one more year, just because, there is a lot of question marks on this defensive line at this point. So kind of bringing back him and his skill set is absolutely huge. I think Mateo is in for a big leap year too. As a true freshman, he saw plenty of snaps last year. Obviously, he was a former 5-star recruit. I think he was a top 30 player coming out of high school. And he's kind of coming into his own and, following the development that we had hoped for. So that's all good. It's just what comes after that, right? So it's great. We have those three pieces, and that's wonderful. But it's, what comes after that? As we all know, the Big Ten is a much more of a trenches game. You're going to need some more of those rotational pieces. You're going to need at least one more guy to kind of be a staple in that defense if you're going to be truly effective. And they have players who are capable of stepping into that role. The Amari Washingtons, Keon Ware-Hudson's been with the program for a couple of years, Ben Roberts, Johnny Bowens. These are all guys who are former 4-star recruits, but they haven't seen a whole lot of playing time. So it's really hard for me to look in this camera and confidently say, this D line is going to be a position of strength, just because we don't know what it looks like outside of those top big three. And Oregon was able to bring a couple more guys in with their 24 class, Xavier Sims, for example. But once again, we don't know what that role is going to look like. Is he ready year one at that position? More than likely not. And that's no knock on him. That's just kind of the role that we've seen year in and year out. Takes a little bit of time for those guys to develop, as with the aforementioned guys previously. But this is the one I'm a little bit worried about, to be honest, just because it is a point of emphasis in the Big Ten. And I'm very curious to see who's capable of stepping up into that role to be that staple on the defensive line outside of the big three.
Yeah, and if you think that a true freshman's going to come in and wreak havoc, unless they are really, really something special, I'm not saying a true freshman can't have flashes. You'll see some flashes, but down in, down out, every game in, game out, you're just not going to see it. They're not big and strong enough. I mean, some of these guys are 300 plus pounds, and they haven't played in high school against guys that big. I don't. I mean, even in high school, yeah, you play like an IMG that's got a really good line, maybe, or some of the Texas kids, that they got some good offensive lines, but week in and week out, you're not used to playing that, and that's what you're getting in the Big Ten. You are getting true nasty road graders that are farm strong, and I'm telling you, you might have flashes, but it's really hard for a true freshman to come in and really do something special. So you're going to have to lean on those guys that have to that have been in the program, or the other option might be some guys that ask to leave, and you might have to go get a guy in the spring portal, which is not ideal, but if you have a guy that's not developing like you want, and you have a guy from Alabama or Texas or Georgia that's not getting the playing time he wants, and he's a sophomore or a junior, and he's got the build and the speed and the possibility to be an impact. I think you got to cut a guy loose that maybe even the fans thought, hey, I thought he was going to be a big contributor, but obviously we saw during practice, spring practice, he wasn't up to snuff, and I think that's going to be some hard decisions for Dan Lanning to make. I think he knows what he's going up against, being a prior SEC guy. But I think he knows. He knows. Look, I'm just saying this. Don't if a defensive lineman jumps in the portal, it's not because of playing time for Oregon. It's going to be because he's asked to leave.
And that's fair. It comes with the territory, right? I think currently, as we're sitting today, we're at 92 scholarship players. Obviously, we have to get down to that 85 scholarship threshold. So we are going to see some people leave. They have to come from a position group somewhere. And, unfortunately, defensive line is one of those position groups in which, they're a little more susceptible to having someone leave just because of the sheer numbers in that position room. If I were to take a guess right now, what I think what's going to happen and how this plays out, and once again, that this is just a complete guess, anything goes in the portal, especially when, some of these surprising names pop up and, everybody and their mom wants to go reach out and say, hey, at least gauge the interest into coming in.
Yeah.
But I think what's going to happen is I think we're going to see like the Keon Ware Hudsons, the Amari Washingtons, Terrence Green's a guy I haven't mentioned yet. I think he's going to get his shot. These are guys who have been with the programs for a couple of years now, and we've been hearing really good things about. I think what's going to happen is I think they are going to get their chance. I don't think Oregon necessarily wants to become a place where it's strictly hey, if you can't produce for me year one or year two, you're out of here. And I think that's a really fickle line that you're kind of walking. And it's not just an Oregon thing; it's all over the country. The transfer portal, it's really opened up a whole new conversation that has to be had with these players. So I don't want people to think this is a knock on Dan or Tosh or even the defensive line players. It's not. It's just the reality of the situation here. So I think they are going to get their chance. But with that kind of comes, like you said, what you're going up against week in and week out. You're going up against one of the premier leagues in terms of offensive line talent and the physicality in the trenches. So if you don't bring your lunch pail every single day, you're not going to be as successful as you want to be, regardless of how good your secondary is, or
Yep.
regardless of how good your offense is. It's not going to matter at that point, because if you're not successful at the line of scrimmage, it's probably not going to pan out for you in the way you want to. So, my guess at this point, I think we're going to see a couple guys leave. I don't want to say we're done bringing in players, but my guess is maybe one, maybe in total, and that might not even be in the defensive line room at this point. You just never know.
Yeah.
But I think we're going to see some departures from this room. The Ben Roberts and the Johnny Bowens, they're very talented players. We've heard great things about them from practice over the last 2 years, their continued development. But, if there's a path where they don't see a way in which they're going to get playing time year two, and the other guys in front of him, aside Jordan Birch, he'll be gone after this year. Jamari Caldwell's the same, but Mateo is still with the program. They brought in some very high caliber players in the recruiting cycle this year. Amari Washington, Terrence Green, they're still back. They might just say, hey, I'm going to go test the waters somewhere else, give myself a chance to play. And that's just, kind of the reality of the transfer portal situation that we're sitting in. So,
Yeah. And I think if you get a guy like a guy maybe from Alabama or Georgia that's a true defensive nose tackle, that can really stuff the run, and he decides to hop in the transfer portal. If I'm Oregon, I'm going all in. If I got to cut a guy because yeah, he's great on practice, we love him, but he's kind of always got hit with the injury bug. Sorry about you, because I'm telling you right now, I'm sure Dan Lanning knows you're gonna have to beef up that defensive line. It's going to be like something that you guys have never that this group of players minus transfers have ever been against. I hope they realize. I hope the staff realizes that what they are going to go up against in the Big Ten, it's a different style of ball. It's not better. It's not worse. The SEC, different style of ball. It's not better. It's not worse, but it's different, and you have to adapt to that. I think Oregon's out of the bunch that are coming in to the Big Ten, they are doing the best. I think that DB room will help, but again, like you said, if you have running backs getting 5, 6, 7 a carry because you can't stop a nosebleed on power I or zone halfback cut left or right or a zone stretch play, you're in for a world of hurt.
yeah.
It's the death by 1,000 cuts is what the Big Ten is about.
Yeah, and even being in the pack, we've seen it in years previous. I think back to like the Christian McCaffrey days. That's one, for example, where if you're just chunking off these small chunk yards, you break maybe 1, 2, 3 long runs a game. It doesn't matter. Once you lose control of the game clock, you lose control of the tempo. Your defense is on the field the entire time. These guys are gassed, and they already can't stop the run game. You know what I mean? It's a really steep downhill slide if you can't stop the run, especially heading into a run heavy league like the Big Ten. Um, what I will say is I think Dan coming from the SEC, obviously spending time both at Alabama, winning a national championship with Georgia as their DC. I think that kind of helps. I think he is understanding of what needs to happen in order to, be successful at that type of level. Obviously, there's still some differences between the SEC play and the Big Ten, but I will say if there are two comparatively similar conferences in terms of play style, it's probably those two leagues,
Yeah.
and to win a national championship, a couple New Year's Six Bowls with Alabama. You're really seeing what it takes to be successful at those levels, and I think he's trying to bring that to Oregon. Now, with that being said, obviously it takes some time to transition into what they've always been, that speedy, flashy defense, which it's fun to watch and it can be great and there are flashes, absolutely. But like you said, it's going to be consistency that is the key this year. And I think he knows that. Tosh has obviously spent time in the NFL. He spent time in the SEC. He kind of has the same mindset, I think, coming from the defensive coordinator side of things. So I do think they understand what needs to happen. It's just a matter of, do they have the pieces on the defensive line with the current roster to be able to do that? So
Yeah, and I have high hopes for Oregon in its first year, and in the Big Ten. But that's my one question mark. Can the defensive line hold up against the barrage of teams that what they're like boa constrictors, right? I mean, they just wrap the coils around you. Next thing you know, you can't breathe. Next thing you know, there's only 2 minutes left on the clock. Especially with the new clock rules, with the constant time running. The Big Ten loves that because now they can cut those those 10, 11, 12, 13 minute drives. You look up and your defense is gassed. And yeah, if you score fast, we saw it versus Ohio State, Michigan.
Mhm.
Michigan, that kind of boa constrictor, run the ball well, where we can pass when we want to or need to with the tight ends and the wide receivers. But what we want to do is we want to run it down your throat, and we want your defense to be on the field as much as possible. Yeah, you can score fast, that's great, but the best thing for a high powered offense is to keep them on the bench. Can't score points when you're on the bench.
Yeah, and like we said, we went through the schedule breakdown a few weeks ago on the channel here, and we got the teams like we got the Illinois, the Marylands, the Purdue's, and you want to look at that right away and be like, oh, those are cakewalks, but at the very same time,
Purdue
yeah,
Purdue will
the
mess
spoiler
around and
makers.
sucker punch you.
Yeah, they don't call them the spoiler makers for nothing. You know what I mean? It's like you have to be careful week in and week out in this league. It's any given week, anything can happen. And it's
Yep.
because of that style right there. If they're able to take the air out of your balloon, if they're able to get you on your heels and, make you adapt your game style to their game style, if they can keep that a low scoring game, a one score game, anything happens in a one score game. We've seen it time and time again. We've
Yep.
seen some great Michigan teams. We've seen some great Ohio State teams. Obviously being from Wisconsin, I've seen some great Wisconsin teams that have lost games they had no business losing. And how does that happen? Same way you mentioned, the death by a thousand cuts. They're able to keep the offense on the sidelines. They slowly gas that defense. And then, if you're in the fourth quarter and it's a one score game, it's like a coin flip, man. Anything happens.
Yeah, Purdue and Kentucky play the same type of ball, and they're the same type. They're just good enough on defense to pester you, and they will just beat you down the field left and right, and pass enough to get to keep you off the field. It's a frustrating game to watch for sure. So, but yeah, I think they map out well. I think you know, we'll have to see. It's exciting. It's talking season right now. Um, you know, spring ball is right around the corner. So go ahead and follow the High Top Sports Oregon Twitter page for all of the spring ball stuff coming up. We're excited. I'm a Florida fan. I've been geeking. I think we're gonna win a natty. No, I'm joking. Off of 20 seconds of practice film. So
Oh,
so
bro, the
Gators
practice
by a
film.
million, baby.
That's where the offseason natties are won, man. You see those flashes in practice film, and you're like, that guy's winning
I don't
the
even know who that
Heisman this
is.
year.
I don't even know who that is. It's like a walk on. I don't
Oh,
even know who that is.
sure.
I don't care. I don't
You,
care.
you see these one-handed catches, or you know what I mean? This like the
Yeah.
defensive blanket that happens one play out of one practice, and you're like, that guy's a stud.
All the
So,
quarterbacks look good throwing on air. The ball really just pops off the hand. You
oh,
know.
the only people allowed at these practices are their own team's media at this point. So all you're seeing is nothing but the highlights. You know what I'm saying? You're
Yep.
not seeing any low lights. So you're like, this team is the greatest thing I've ever seen.
Yep.
So I also look forward to that. I think I said March 15th is Oregon's opening. Maybe it's the 14th, excuse me. One of those two dates is the opening for Oregon Spring Ball. So yeah, definitely be sure to tune into that. We'll be going over everything there. I'll be able to convince you guys we're going to win the offseason natty there. So definitely looking forward to that.
Yeah, and I think what we are gonna do we got as high top an organization we got planned out strategically because we have Florida, Georgia. We cover Florida, Georgia. I have a recruiting channel, and then obviously the Oregon channel here. I think our first live call in should be after the spring game. See what Oregon fans think. Live call in show. Get your feet wet on those. It's wild, and I think that would be fun. Let's go ahead and lock that in. First live call in show. We'll go ahead and do it after the spring game.
Oh man, it's gonna be excited. I think the vibes are gonna be high. I know a lot of people excited to see the Dante Moores and the Dylan Gabriels for the first time. Evan Stewart, nice and healthy. Oregon fans familiar with Jurion Dickey. He's gonna hit the field healthy for the first time. Tons of portal additions that we're gonna see. So myself, this is probably one of the spring games I've been most excited for in my entire lifetime. So I can only imagine everybody else, and definitely looking forward to the call-in show, hearing what the rest of the fans got to say.
For sure, for sure. All right, we're going to go ahead and wrap it up. I am Cody the Professor, and we have Derek the Duck, and we will see you later.